out here. We've had to move schedules around a lot, and sometimes it's a little short notice, so thank you very much for coming. I really appreciate it. Hopefully we'll be able to give you some good information. As you all know, this is John Norman's book. It's been used on lieutenant exams. It's an older John Norman book. It's been used on captain's exams and lieutenant exams for a lot of years, and I think there's some really good stuff in here, and I pretty much agree with almost everything he says. But there's one topic which you folks may not be too familiar with. Lacey would, but it's about 5-inch companies. And I can't tell you how many times members of 5-inch companies have called me and said, have you ever looked at page 105 in Norman's book? And so I looked it up. You know, I'm the first guy that called me about it. I looked it up. And what it's about is that, you know, we have really tried to push with the term, in terms of 5-inch companies, to always be at that hydrant and push the water to whatever it is you want the water to get to, okay? In Norman's book, he has a diagram of a hydrant and 1,000 feet of hose, 3-inch hose, I'm sorry, 5-inch hose, and an engine sitting right behind an aerial device that's elevated to a certain degree. And he goes through his numbers, and it's not as though his numbers are wrong, but there's 4 differences in what he's telling. What he's saying with his math is that it's easier to get your desired 1,000 gallons a minute with 5-inch hose companies for them to straight lay that 1,000 feet from the hydrant and pump to the aerial device. But before he talks about that, he's absolutely certain that the very best situation is, of course, to have an engine at the hydrant and an engine at the back of the aerial device. In other words, first engine pumps to the second engine, and the second engine boosts the pressure for the tower. The problem is, in his diagram, he lists a couple things that are a little bit extraordinary. First, he shows that hydrant having 75 pounds of flow pressure from the hydrant's 5-inch discharge. And I would bet a lot of money that there's not a hydrant in Denver that can do that, okay? I think where he may have come up with that was when he wrote his first book. New York had a system of high volume and high pressure, like super hydrants. And they would be sitting right next to a regular hydrant, but those things were monstrous, okay? Well, I called a friend the other day, and he said that those hydrants are no longer in service, which really doesn't matter to me. But he's talking about having 75 pounds. He also assumes that when that water gets to the engine, they're going to have 10 pounds, okay? If you, in fact, had 10 pounds of pressure, then it is completely possible for that engine to boost that pressure up to whatever that pressure needed to be for the aerial device. The problem is, with 1,000 gallons a minute through 5-inch hose, in 1,000 feet, you're going to lose 80 pounds of pressure. So how a 75-pound plug provides 80 pounds of pressure, or overcomes 80 pounds of friction loss, I can't quite figure that. But the most important thing, and it's a huge part of his discussion on this, is that he fears pumping more than 200 pounds of pressure through that 5-inch, because that was their standard. It might even have been an NFPA standard, but things have changed. And on Denver now, in fact, we're supposed to test our new 5-inch at 300 pounds. So that's a big difference. So I just wanted to go over that in case anybody had any questions about it. I don't want to spend too much time on it, but it is something that needs to be discussed with 5-inch companies. So for today, our tactical portion about this is Ricky's rib shack to orientate you. This is the Connex building. This is the plug at the southeast, right behind the Connex building, and this is the one that you're going to be using, okay? This is our fictitious warehouse. What I'm trying to simulate is a warehouse with a lot of fire and a big warehouse door that's open for you, okay? The width of it is pretty close to what a warehouse door is. Of course, I had no way of putting a ceiling on it, but that's where the fire is going to be. This is the main new tower, and this is the hydrant on the southwest corner. It has a section of 5-inch laid out, open butted. It has nothing to do with you guys. Its purpose is so we don't spall the concrete. The water's just dribbling out, so it has nothing to do with you guys. Then we have a 3-inch line broke down to 1 3/4 inches with a nozzle on it. While one engine is doing its evolution, the other engine will staff this headline and make sure that we don't burn down our new $1 million tower. Just keep it. And also, if this Connex building starts to smoke a little, spray some water over there too, okay? And a backup light. So the idea is that Tower 9, we want you spotted so that your ladder tower will be able to be extended pretty much perpendicular into that warehouse door, okay? To do that, there's a fence that runs along here. You're going to want to be pretty close to that fence. Obviously, you've got to leave enough room to get your outriggers out. So that's where the tower is going to set up. The engine is going to reverse lay. They'll be coming this direction, reverse lay from this tower. What I'm going to want you to do, guys, when you get your outriggers out, I want you to rotate that tower over and get it up high enough in the air so that engine can drive underneath it, and then we're going to want you to lower it, okay? Engine's going to reverse from this tower around here and get connected with your 5-inch soft suction or your 5-inch hose and pump through your discharge lines. So with that being said, we'll start the class and we'll go over this some more, but that's just giving you kind of a preview. I think most people on the fire department would probably agree with me that almost all of our companies are pretty darn good at what I call bread and butter fires. The engine straight lays into the fire, pulls a pre-connect 1 3/4 inches, and goes in and puts the fire out. I think we're really good at that. I'd say at least an A-. Unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on your perspective, we have far less major fires, okay? So we get less practice at that. The reason that that's an issue is because the tactics for a much larger major fire are significantly different from a bread and butter fire, okay? The first most important thing, in my view, is the engine has to be at the plug. Plugs are not little mini pumpers. They have tons of volume, but they don't really have very much pressure, and they have no way of boosting pressure like our engines can, okay? That's the first thing, is that we want to get engines at the hydrant, okay? The second biggest thing is our towers and our trucks. We really want to force the emphasis on bigger fires to get that bucket or stick down low, shooting right in the fire. We have in the past a lot of times done nothing more than put the stick up in the air and try to shoot the water down where the fire's trying to come out. And that's the only place the water goes. And you're going to have fire all over underneath that hasn't necessarily penetrated, and none of the water you're trying to put on that major fire is hitting anything other than the fire that's trying to escape. So our goal, and what we'll be trying to have you participate today in, is get that bucket or stick down low, shooting in. Get that fire out, okay? The other thing that we're trying to focus our job towards in terms of engine operations, disregarding 5-inch companies, is that we want to try to start building our tactics on getting 3 3-inch lines to supply a Masterstream, okay? Now this is something a little different, but almost all of our trucks now have a Trimes on the back. And what we want to do is get 3 of those lines laid. The reason being, I would really like also to set our goal on Masterstreams to instantly try to develop 1,000 gallons a minute. Okay? 1,000 gallons a minute is a good goal. When I was first in the academy, I remember instructors saying, when it comes to big fires, it's a slow, tedious, it's just going to build a parking lot, take your time. I don't really agree with that. I think our Masterstream application, if we train on it and practice, can be far more rapid, okay? And we can save structures before it's a surround and drown situation, okay? So let's talk about, remember the goal of 1,000 gallons a minute, okay? If we in fact lay 3 lines or get 3 lines in place, our GPM in each one of those lines is going to be 333 if you want to be really technical, okay? I like to emphasize our rule of thumb for 3-inch hose. We're going to do just a little bit of hydraulics here. I like to emphasize the rule of thumb for 3-inch hose is Q squared. Q being GPM divided by 100. So if we have 3 lines with 300 gallons, Q is going to be 3.3. Okay? If you use a calculator and you actually multiply 3.3 times 3.3, it comes out being 10.8. Okay? You could even think of it as 300 gallons per line. Then it's easy, 3 squared is 9. But I'm not a big fan of the stomp on the hose and say that's a good pressure. But what I am a huge fan of is keeping it simple on the fire ground. Okay? So for me, simple number for this stuff is 10. It's easily multiplied. If you have 300 feet out, you got 30 pounds of friction loss. If you have 500 feet out, you have 50 pounds of friction loss. Easy math to do on the fire ground. Okay? And that's what we want. We want the engines to be able to get those lines in place quickly and get that dialed into something that's going to be close to 1,000 gallons per minute, which is going to require 80 pounds of nozzle pressure. Okay? In terms of the 5-inch companies, it's a little bit more complicated. I have no rule of thumb for 5-inch. Okay? The C factor is 0.08. How many of you would feel comfortable multiplying your figures by 0.08 in the field? Not very easy to do, but I think I have an idea that maybe will work good for you. With the goal of 2,000 gallons a minute through 5-inch, your friction loss is 32 per 100. This may surprise some of you. It did me when I first started looking at this stuff, because I was taught from day one that there's no friction loss in 5-inch. That's just not true. For 2,000 gallons a minute, it's 32. Now I'm going to tell you something that's a fact. It's mathematical. It simply can't be disputed. Any time, whether you are pumping through 3-inch or 2.5 or lightweight 2.5 or 2-inch or 1.75 inches, any time you reduce your GPM in half, your friction loss reduces 4 times. Doesn't matter what kind of hose, what the lining is, it doesn't matter. You reduce your GPM in half, your friction loss reduced 4 times. Okay? So think of that number 32. For some reason, 32 seems kind of easy for me. And then let's move back to our goal of 1,000. Okay? So now we got a goal of 1,000 with 5-inch. All you got to do is divide 32 by 4. If you can remember 32 and you can divide by 4, you're golden. So what does that number come out to be? 8. That's what your friction loss, very closely, is going to be for 5-inch with your goal of 1,000 gallons a minute. To me, there's not much difference between 8 and 10. And so with the 5-inch stuff, go with 10. Easy math, easy to do in the field. And you're always going to be able to make minor adjustments for other things. However, do not use this system on ground monitors. I'm a little scared of those things as it is, but ground monitors are different than Masterstreams on a stick. They're both Masterstreams, but they're different because why? Because there's going to be a human real close to it, okay? So for your Masterstreams, I'll give you another favorite number of mine, 3. Start with 3 per 100 and you're going to be in good shape. Also, if you are going to decide for less GPM and go with those smaller Masterstream tips, go with 3 on those as well, okay? But I'd like to say something about that in terms of Masterstreams. All the books say 1 3/8, 1 1/2, 1 3/4, and 2 inch for the Masterstreams, okay, in terms of tip sizes. That smallest tip, 500 GPM. The next smallest tip, approximately 600 GPM. I know in a book that says a Masterstream, but think about 500 GPM. You can get that done with 2 hand lines. My opinion is if you need a Masterstream, let's go with 1000 GPM. Let's go with those bigger tips. I was at a class a couple years ago given by a retired New York tower operator, they call him, and he was telling the class no aerial device should have any tip on it other than a 2 inch and an 1 3/4. And everybody's listening to this, and finally this one guy raises his hand, wasn't me. He says, well, you know, I like to keep those smaller tips on there to protect the threads of the bigger tips. And Mark shouts out, I want you to screw those threads up so you'll never be tempted to screw those smaller tips on there. That was his opinion, and I gotta say I kind of agree with that. However, there may be cases that maybe you want a little more reach and you want to go with that smaller tip. Personally, I haven't seen if the truck gets set up properly, positioned properly, that that's an issue. Most of our trouble with fires and Masterstreams is we're not delivering that water properly to get that proper GPM. Okay? Any questions on that? Okay. Let's talk a little bit about the humid valve. Our humid valves nowadays are going on about 16 years, I think. Now the humid valve gets used a lot, almost sometimes daily, right? You straight lay, you hook up the humid, good to go. However, what doesn't get used a lot and you know, tested a lot is when you actually have an engine go back to that humid, stretch a 5 inch from that humid to the engine, and then augment that humid, okay? So part of this class, and we're not going to have time to do it today, but we made a film of it. Part of what we're asking is that all the engine companies in the city in the next month or so test that humid by making sure that the 5 inch connects properly, make sure you can pump through it, okay? There's a couple things that we're starting to see. A lot of engine companies put a cap, a storage cap on that humid to protect it, okay? The trouble is our humid valves are starting to leak a little, lots of them, and they don't leak very much, but if you think about it, engine goes to the hydrant, sets up, you know, that water may be flowing for, you know, maybe 5 minutes. That builds up a lot of pressure. And so that cap is pretty hard to take off. So a lot of people have put a little bleeder valve in there to help with that. Some cases that helps, but sometimes not so much. So my point to you today is when you test your humid valves, if you have problems with them and you're having a heck of a time getting that cap off, the shop fixes humid valves. So send it to the shop. They have loaners available so you can get it. Because we got a brand new one the other day and tested it and it didn't leak a drop. So that's the deal on that. So I'm guessing that you guys might be a little bit disappointed in me, those of you that have been around me for a while, if I didn't have at least a few comments about nozzles, okay? A lot of people think I hate fog nozzles, which I do, but it's not for the reasons that you think. It was because I failed an engineer's test a long time ago because I pumped the fog at 50. So I'm done with them. But anyway, I started, when I first started roving as a lieutenant, I was assigned to District 4. At the time, Engine 3 was in District 4, okay? My whole career, I had used nothing but fog nozzles, okay? I go to Engine 3. I always had to go there on Saturdays because that was Steve Garrett's Kelly Day. And we got a lot of fires on Saturdays. So I go in and put this fire out. And, you know, I'm looking at, you know, it seemed fine. It worked good. The only difference that I really saw between Steve's smoothbore nozzles on the 1 3/4 was that I didn't seem to get my ears burnt quite as bad, and the visibility seemed to stay a little bit better. But in terms of nozzle reaction, I didn't really notice any difference. I have a pretty good understanding of pressures. I fully comprehend what PSI means. I can look at a stream and get fairly close to guess what it is. But in terms of nozzle reaction, it's a whole nother ballgame for me. Nozzle reaction is measured in feet per second. Doesn't have anything to do with PSI. PSI affects that feet per second, but when they talk about what the nozzle reaction is of any particular nozzle, they say feet per second. Now I know what the 0 to 60 times are in my car, but I really don't know what feet per second is. They have formulas for it, which I found kind of interesting. For a 1 3/4, similar GPMs, the nozzle reaction for a smoothbore is 78. The nozzle reaction for a fog is 80. Not a big difference. I mean, I really don't know the difference of 2 feet per second. But I know when I hold them, I don't notice much difference. However, on a 2.5-inch nozzle, the difference for a smoothbore is 122 feet per second, and the fog is 131. If my math serves me correct, that's about 9. That might seem like a little bit bigger deal, but still those numbers don't mean a lot to me, and I don't know if they mean anything to you. But my only suggestion is that you get both lines right next to each other, flowing that amount of water, and see if there's a difference. And this parlays itself into something that I've really tried to set as a goal on the fire department. What I would like to see is that people's tactics are based on actual fire experience or training, not on politics. Your choice of tactics should be based on your own vision of what you're trying to accomplish, not what this person says or what this person says. And that can only be done through actual firefighting experience and by training. So I'd really like you guys to think about it before you start deciding which way you're going to do things. And this evolves into all different parts of our job. But base your opinion as officers, as young firefighters that are trying to be officers, base your opinion on actual good tactics that you've seen work for you. Okay? That's about all I got. Oh, there's one more thing I got to say. So for smoothbore nozzles, our nozzle pressure is 50. Okay? I think I kind of get, and it's been 50, I think, for 100 years, industry-wide. Some departments, I think some departments back east maybe go with 40. Most in the books, most of them say 50. Okay? I think they probably came up with that number 100 years ago because somebody held that nozzle and said, and you were pumping it at 80 and they're like, whoa, that's too much. Or you were pumping it at 30, nah, that's not enough. Probably was really like 48, bam, 50. Makes sense? I think it's a good number. But something I have tried to figure out, I've researched it a little bit, I've talked to a lot of people, is how the heck did we ever come up with a nozzle pressure of 80? The reason I question that is because in the years that I've spent experimenting with this stuff, with Masterstreams, I found that I thought that the reason was if you pump above that recommended pressure, your stream starts to be destroyed. But in all the experimentation that I've done, the higher the pressure I pump, the better the stream. The more water, obviously, the further the stream goes. So I haven't seen any problem with pressures over 100 on Masterstreams. Again, we're not talking ground monitors, okay? We're talking. So does anybody here have a reason where they came up with 80? Nobody. I gotta guess. Since it's so old, I'm thinking that obviously 100 years ago, our apparatus, our aerial apparatus, was not nearly as stable or huge or strong as it is today. And I think they came up with that 80 because anything above that might tip the truck over. That's my guess. But the point of all this is don't be worried about having a little bit more pressure than 100. Okay? It's not going to cause any problem to that tower or truck, and you're probably going to get a little bit more water. So with today, we're going to go with 10 pounds friction loss per 100. I'll tell you ahead of time that it's about a 300-foot stretch. We're kind of using all these companies as guinea pigs because there's a little bit of misunderstanding in terms of what the friction loss is in the actual pipe. I'm not talking about head pressure. There's some varying numbers. We had a couple rigs out here the other day that things were like 50 pounds off. We're trying to figure out why that is. But we're going to go, you got 300 feet, so we're going 30 for our friction loss in our hose. And we're going to go for 80 pounds nozzle pressure. And I'd like you, so that's 110, right? Engineers, I would like you to start out at about 200. Give us about 90 pounds for that stick, okay? One more thing about the 3-3-inch lines. Okay, so I'm pretty sure every single engine in the city carries 2 hose beds, except for the 5-inch companies, carry 2 hose beds of 3-inch. So it's real easy to lay 2 3-inch lines. Oh, you just told us we need 3. Couple things to consider. One is that you might be close enough, and I'd like you to do that today, because all the other rigs did it fairly successfully. I'd like you to reverse lay that 3-inch and then have the guys hand drag back to the rig, okay? That works pretty good when you're close. If you're a lot further away, that might be a little bit bigger deal. So I also have a suggestion for that. Most of the rigs have a static of 2.5. If you look up in the Firestream's book, the formula, not the formula, but the numbers for 2 3-inches and 1 2.5, the number they give for you is 12. Again, we're 2 off, right? Think 10. You can do that with 10, and if you do the math on that, the GPM ends up being 950, which again is pretty close to our goal of 1,000. Okay? Does anybody have any questions on this? Yeah, you first.
Do you factor in the 25 for the tri-meets?
You know, we're working on that because the rig the day we had some problems with not having, they had to go above higher than this number. You know, I thought maybe that tri-meets is making us need another 25. Yesterday we did it, didn't need it. It worked perfect at 90. And the thing was, the day we had the problems, it was both engines that needed to pump at the higher pressure. Yesterday when we did it, both engines pumped at 280 pounds nozzle pressure. Yes?
I know the main purpose of this training is high volume water. But also I see a tactical change that we're trying to do as far as truck companies with aerial devices of more of a straight in as opposed to an aerial approach. My question is that if we're punching water through, are we having any concerns with that collapse zone in there on the rig? And if so, our reflex time between safety officer now being the new commanders, that reflex time of them recognizing, because before we would, obviously, because we've already lost the roof. So we're going above. So now we're off to the side. I'm assuming that the roof's already gone. Now we're talking pre-stressed slabs and or
Yes.
brick buildings downtown on the hill. Having that collapse issue.
That's a great question and comment. All of this stuff is not set in stone. What I'm trying to get companies to think about is if you have a pretty good sized fire and it's not through the roof yet, and you don't have a type of structure that obviously you don't want to stick your stick or your bucket into a collapse zone.
Right.
I'm talking about the fires, and we've had a lot of them. I just got done telling you we didn't have a lot of them, but we've had a lot of fires that had this tactic been deployed, we would have been there about an hour and a half instead of 3 hours. Okay, that's a great question. We don't want to put our stick in a collapse zone. We're talking about early stages of a big fire that you have a chance of knocking that thing down fast. Any other questions? Yes, Chief.
Friction loss between a tower ladder and a straight stick.
Is there what?
Friction loss difference between a tower.
Well, we're checking that out. It seems as it stands now that we've only done one tower, so we're going to learn more today. The first tower we used, it was less than the truck. Less.
How much?
About 20 pounds. I have some thoughts on that, because if you look at these new sticks with the fancy remote control device to run the nozzle, if you look at that actual nozzle complex, it's got lots of curves in it. So I think we may be losing quite a bit in it. But like I said yesterday, wasn't quite as much. But we're going to do this several times with a lot of different companies. Hopefully we'll come out with some really good numbers. Also, one more thing I should say. What I'm telling you today about 10, please don't go take the engineer's test and say, Phil Miller said the answer was 10, okay? And the guys and the people are going to have to start getting licenses for acting engineer. There's going to be a written test on that as well. Has not been developed yet. But those numbers may be exact C factors. They may be off the pump chart. I don't know. My goal is fire ground tactics. Maybe you're an acting engineer. You roll up. You got a pretty big fire. 10. Bam. Got it in there. Got some good water flow. Okay? Did that answer? Anything else? Okay, you can shut it off. The tower in this case gets positioned to where they can be fairly perpendicular to the fire. They're getting their outriggers out and preparing the ladder to be put into position. As they do this, the first arriving engine is going to reverse lay 2 3-inch lines and then hand drag a third 3-inch line back to the tower. Go ahead, John. So as you can see, the engine company pulls 2 3-inch lines and wraps the outrigger so that they have plenty of hose to reach back to the trimedes. going again. I'll tell you when, as you notice, we were pitot gauging that tip and we're right at 80, which gives us easily 1,000, actually 1,082, 2-inch tip.
Engine 29, that's perfect. Exactly 80 pounds pressure.
I'd like it to be a little bigger. Tower 9, extinguish the fire. Put in your way. Engine 29, shut her down. Engine 29, shut her down.